Sarah Williams had always been known as the perfect wife. To the outside world, her life with Jack, her husband of 12 years, seemed like a fairy tale, one filled with laughter, stability, and mutual respect. They had a nice home on the edge of town, a comfortable routine, and everything looked, on the surface, just the way it should be. Friends often admired their relationship, how Jack would surprise Sarah with flowers after a long day at work, how they'd laugh together over dinner, or how they always seemed to be in tune with one another's needs. Yet, behind closed doors, Sarah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. Over the years, their connection had slowly dwindled, unnoticed by Jack. Work, kids, and the daily grind had replaced the passion and intimacy they once shared. Jack was a good man, hard-working, dependable, and loving, but somewhere along the way, he'd become too absorbed in his career, and Sarah had become too absorbed in her own loneliness. She loved him, but that love no longer felt like the warmth it once had. Now, it was just familiarity, routine, and the occasional moment of fleeting affection. Sarah found herself increasingly restless, longing for something more, something exciting. The routine of her days had started to feel suffocating, and that's when David entered the picture. David, her personal trainer at the local gym, was younger, more energetic, and most importantly, he made her feel alive again. Their flirtations began innocently enough, but soon they escalated into something much deeper, a connection neither of them could ignore. David saw Sarah for who she was, someone full of potential, someone who still had dreams and desires beyond her role as a wife and mother. What began as stolen glances and subtle touches after workouts soon became passionate rendezvous, secret meetings in hidden corners of the city, and stolen hours away from prying eyes. The affair, though thrilling, was also deeply troubling to Sarah. She loved Jack, at least she thought she did, but she couldn't deny the growing pull she felt toward David. Every kiss with him made her feel like a woman again, not just a wife or mother. She had forgotten what it felt like to be desired like this. The guilt gnawed at her constantly. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was betraying Jack, but every time David whispered promises of freedom, adventure, and passion, she couldn't resist. The affair was a secret that weighed heavily on Sarah's conscience, but also fueled her desire for something more, something different. The tipping point came one cold, winter evening when Sarah stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself. Is this really my life? She wondered. Am I doomed to live a quiet, predictable existence forever, pretending to be someone I'm not? Her reflection stared back at her, but the woman she saw was no longer the same woman who had married Jack all those years ago. The young woman with dreams, with fire, had vanished, replaced by a woman who was numb, suffocated by routine and the responsibilities of family. And in that moment, Sarah knew what she had to do. The realization had come to her like a thunderclap on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Sarah was sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at the coffee cup in her hands. When it hit her, she was done. Done pretending. Done playing the dutiful wife. The years of suffocating routine, of feeling invisible in her own home, had taken their toll. And now, her affair with David had given her a glimpse of what she was missing: excitement, passion, and the feeling of being alive again. Her heart raced as she thought about the future. Could she really leave Jack? The man who had been by her side for more than a decade? The man she had once promised to love and cherish? The man who still had no idea that she had fallen in love with someone else? The guilt was unbearable, but the thought of freedom, of starting fresh with David, was intoxicating. And then, just as quickly as the thought crossed her mind, a plan began to form. Why leave quietly when she could escape in a way that would leave no trace? She could make it look like she was taken, make it look like she had been the victim of a robbery, and then disappear. Jack would never suspect her of being involved. He would think she had been caught up in something dangerous, something beyond her control. It would be perfect. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, the details of the plan coming together piece by piece. A robbery. It sounded so simple, so effective. No one would question her disappearance if it looked like she had been the victim of a violent crime, and she could run away with David, never to be found. The first step was to make sure everything looked believable. Sarah knew their house inside and out. She knew where all the valuable items were, what the most prized possessions were, and how to make it seem like the robbery had been well planned. She would have to make sure she wasn't there when the robbery occurred. That was easy enough. Jack had a business trip coming up in a few days, and he would be gone for at least 48 hours. Perfect. She began making a mental checklist. Where would she hide her things? How would she prepare for the getaway? The more Sarah thought about it, the more she felt a surge of excitement. She would take a few things, some jewelry, a couple of high-end electronics, and leave the rest behind. The police would find the scene, and based on the mess she would leave, they'd assume a robber had broken in. She would even make sure to knock over a vase or two, creating chaos to make it seem like the intruder had been violent. It had to be messy, but not too messy, just enough to make it seem like a crime of passion. Once Sarah had her plan in place, she immediately called David. He was waiting for her on the other end of the line, and she could hear the excitement in his voice. This wasn't just about their affair anymore. This was about freedom. Freedom from her marriage. Freedom from her old life. Are you sure about this? David's voice was low, hesitant. This is a big step, Sarah. We can't go back once we do this. I've thought it through, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the anxiety swirling in her chest. I'm done pretending. I want to be with you. This is the only way. David was silent for a moment. Sarah could almost hear him weighing the consequences. He wasn't a criminal, but he was desperate. Desperate to be with her, to leave behind his own troubled past. She could feel the connection between them, the shared understanding of what this escape meant for both of them. All right, David said finally, his voice resolute. Let's do it. We'll make sure it looks real. We'll get you out of there. Sarah, we'll get away together. With the plan set, Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. She knew there would be risks, too many to count, but there was no turning back. The pieces were falling into place, and she felt more alive than she had in years. Sarah spent the next few days meticulously working on the details. She arranged for Jack's business trip to line up perfectly with the night of the robbery. She made sure to tell him that she had some personal errands to run, which would give her the perfect excuse to be alone when the robber broke in. On the night of the robbery, she would leave the back door slightly ajar, ensuring that it looked like the intruder had entered unnoticed. She would call the police after David had already left, making sure they arrived to find her visibly shaken but unharmed, with her belongings scattered around the house. She had already prepared a story. She had been attacked, but the robber had fled before taking anything too important. She would be the victim, and Jack would never question it. She would play the part of the frightened wife who had been trapped in a nightmare, and Jack would rush to her side, believing every word. As the days passed, Sarah's excitement grew. She packed a small bag, just enough to get her started. The rest of her life would stay behind in that house. Her marriage, her past, everything would be left behind, erased with one final act of deception. David was ready, and so was she. She had made her decision. There was no turning back now. With a last glance at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, Sarah whispered almost to herself, "This is it. This is how it ends." Her heart pounded as the plan clicked into place. The pieces were all in motion, and Sarah could already taste the freedom she had longed for. It was a cold, windy night when Sarah stood by the kitchen window, her heart pounding in her chest. Jack had just left for his business trip. He wouldn't be back for 2 days. The house was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Outside, the world seemed still, but inside Sarah's mind, everything was a whirlwind. Tonight was a night. The moment she had been preparing for was finally here. She glanced at the clock, 8:45 p.m. David called earlier, confirming everything was in place. He'd be here soon. The plan had been set for weeks, but now that it was finally happening, the weight of it all felt heavier than she expected. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Was she really doing this? She tried to push the doubts from her mind, focusing instead on the excitement that bubbled up inside her. This was the escape she had longed for, the escape from her marriage, from her old life. In just a few hours, everything would change. She walked into the living room and double-checked everything. The back door was slightly ajar, just as she had planned. She'd have to make sure it looked like the intruder had snuck in without anyone noticing. Her purse, A few pieces of jewelry and some electronics had been carelessly tossed onto the floor. She had knocked over a vase on purpose. The shattered pieces scattered across the rug. She wanted the scene to look like a mess, like a desperate robbery, but not too much of a mess. It needed to seem realistic, not overdone. She glanced over at the stairs, where their bedroom door stood slightly open. Jack's side of the bed was empty, just as it should be. Sarah had made sure to act like everything was normal in the days leading up to this moment. No one could know what she was planning, not even Jack. He was away, and she would make sure he believed she had been the victim of a random crime. The air felt thick with tension, and Sarah couldn't help but fidget. She ran her hands through her hair, trying to steady her nerves. Every step of the plan had been carefully thought out. But now, the reality of it all made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. At 9 p.m., the doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was time. She hurried to the door and peeked through the peephole. David stood there, dressed in dark clothes, wearing gloves and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His eyes glinted with excitement. But there was something else there, too. Nervousness, maybe even fear. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was something far more dangerous. But David wasn't backing out. He knew what he had to do. Is everything ready? Sarah asked, opening the door just wide enough to let him in. She couldn't afford to look suspicious. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. David nodded. It's all set. Let's just do it. Sarah stepped aside to let him in. He was carrying a small bag, the contents unknown to her. They hadn't discussed the finer details of what he would take, just enough to make it look like a robbery had gone awry. David moved swiftly through the house, glancing around as if familiarizing himself with the surroundings. Sarah followed him, her eyes constantly darting to the clock. Everything had to happen exactly as planned. The police would arrive soon after the call. By the time they did, she and David would already be long gone. The plan was simple. David would make sure she was attacked but not hurt. He would take a few valuable items, make a mess to suggest a robbery, and leave. Then, Sarah would call the police, playing the part of a terrified, shaken woman. David stopped in front of the back door. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Sarah nodded, her stomach churning with a mix of fear and excitement. "Yes, just let's get it over with." David opened the door wide enough to make it seem like he'd snuck in through the back. The cold air swept inside, and Sarah shivered involuntarily. This was the point of no return. Everything had to look real now. David rushed through the kitchen and into the living room. He didn't need to say anything more. They had rehearsed this 100 times. Sarah followed him, taking a deep breath. She grabbed her phone from her pocket, ready to make the call. Then, just as they had planned, David attacked her. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her to the floor, making sure to stay gentle enough not to cause any real harm, but rough enough to make it look believable. Sarah gasped in shock, letting out a scream, as if she hadn't seen him coming. The sound was enough to echo through the house, just loud enough to make the scenario seem authentic. Her body trembled with fear, even though she knew it was all part of the act. David made sure to move quickly, taking the items they'd agreed on, Sarah's jewelry, her purse, a laptop, and tossing them into his bag. He made noise as he rifled through drawers and cabinets, knocking things over in the process. Sarah let out another scream for effect, her hands instinctively clutching the edge of the couch. She could hear David moving around, making it seem like he was ransacking the place. At the same time, she was careful to keep her eyes on the clock. The longer the scene dragged on, the more likely it would seem staged. She couldn't afford for anyone to show up too early, but she couldn't wait too long either. The timing had to be perfect. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, David grabbed her wrist, pulled her up, and shoved her toward the corner of a room. "Stay there," he hissed, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. She nodded quickly, playing the part of the scared, vulnerable woman. David grabbed the last few items, his final pieces of evidence, and started toward the door. The mess he had created was exactly what Sarah wanted. She glanced around the room and felt a flicker of guilt, but it was quickly swallowed by the rush of freedom she could almost taste. She could hear David moving quickly, footsteps toward the back door, and then silence. Sarah wasted no time. As soon as she heard the door slam shut, she scrambled to her feet and grabbed her phone, dialing 911. Her voice cracked as she spoke, playing the role of the distraught wife to perfection. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice came through. Someone broke into my house. Sarah cried, her breath ragged with feigned fear. I don't know what happened. I was home alone and, oh God, he attacked me. I think he's gone now, but he took everything. Ma'am, stay calm. We've dispatched officers to your location. Can you tell me your address? Sarah quickly rattled off her address, making sure to sound as panicked and disoriented as possible. She was shaking, trying to make her distress seem genuine. She had to sell this. She had to make sure Jack would never suspect a thing. I don't know what to do. He was so quick. I don't know what he took. Please hurry, she sobbed. The dispatcher assured her help was on the way. Sarah hung up and slumped onto the couch, trying to steady her breathing. Her hands trembled as she looked around at the scene. It was done. Now, all she had to do was wait. The seconds felt like hours as Sarah sat on the couch, her body trembling from a mixture of adrenaline and anxiety. She stared at the shattered vase on the floor, the strewn items, and the disarray she'd so carefully arranged to mimic a robbery gone wrong. The world outside seemed distant and irrelevant now. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The silence of the house was unnerving. She could hear nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The police were on their way, but she wasn't sure how long they would take. It didn't matter. What mattered now was what she would do after they arrived. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her trance. David, she picked up with trembling hands, trying to keep her voice steady. Did you get out? I'm in the car. David's voice was low, urgent. It's all set. I've got the stuff, and I'm heading to the rendezvous point. How about you? I'm fine, Sarah lied, trying to push the fear from her voice. The cops will be here soon. I've already called them. Good. Keep calm. You know what to do. I'll meet you in an hour at the airport. It's all going according to plan. Just stay in control. I will, Sarah whispered. I'm ready. The line went dead. For a brief moment, Sarah sat still, staring at the walls around her. Everything felt surreal. She had always imagined running away, dreamed of a life beyond her marriage, beyond her responsibilities. But now, as the weight of the situation pressed down on her, she began to feel the full weight of what she was doing. She wasn't just leaving Jack. She wasn't just escaping from a suffocating life. She was abandoning everything. Her family, her home, her future. She was cutting all ties and stepping into the unknown. But she had made the choice. There was no turning back. Not long after a phone call with David, Sarah heard sirens approaching, growing louder with each passing second. Her heart began to race. She had practiced what she would say, how she would act, but now that the moment was here, her nerves were on edge. The front doorbell rang, followed by loud knocks. Sarah shot to her feet, wiping her palms on her jeans. Her mind raced as she prepared to play her role, the distraught wife who had narrowly escaped a violent robbery. She had rehearsed it 1,000 times in her head, but the fear and excitement coursing through her made it all feel too real. Ma'am, are you in there? A deep voice shouted from outside. Sarah hurried to the door, flinging it open. A police officer stood in front of her, his uniform dark against the night. Behind him, there were 2 other officers, each one looking around with a sense of urgency. The officer at the door raised an eyebrow, studying her carefully. I was attacked. Sarah gasped, clutching her chest for effect. Her breath came out in short, panicked gasps. I was just sitting here, and he came in through the back door. He pushed me around, knocked me over. He took everything. I was so scared. I thought I was going to die. The officer stepped closer, his face hard but not unkind. It's okay, ma'am. You're safe now. We need you to stay calm and tell us exactly what happened. Can you do that? Sarah nodded quickly, her voice cracking as she spoke. I was just sitting on the couch. I heard the back door open, and before I knew it, he was here. He grabbed me. I didn't know what to do. I screamed. I tried to fight back, but he just pushed me down and started taking things. My purse, my jewelry. He was so quick, and then he just ran. I don't know where he went. The officer looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. Was he armed? Did he say anything? Sarah shook her head frantically, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. No, no. He didn't say a word. I think he was in a hurry. I didn't even see his face. He wore a hat, and his coat covered his body. I couldn't see anything. All right, the officer said, stepping back and motioning for the other officers to begin their work. We'll take a look around and see if we can find anything. Stay here for now. We'll get a statement from you once things are secure. The officers moved inside, surveying the house with the practiced eyes of those who had seen it all before. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, watching them go about their work. She wanted to run, wanted to bolt out of the house and never look back, but she forced herself to stay still, stay calm, stick to the story. She had already made up her mind. She would give her statement, tell them what they wanted to hear, and once they were gone, she would leave. She would walk out that door and never return. The minutes stretched on as the officers sifted through the house, cataloging the items that had been taken. Sarah remained by the front door, her eyes darting back and forth, trying to keep herself composed. She was keenly aware of the time ticking by, of every moment that passed while she waited for her chance to escape. After what felt like an eternity, the officer who had initially spoken to her returned. He was holding a small notebook, ready to take her statement. We've checked the premises, he said, his tone official. There doesn't appear to be any forced entry. It seems like the intruder had a key or knew how to bypass your locks. We'll take your statement now. As Sarah began to speak, recounting the details of a robbery in the same shaky voice, she could feel her mind drifting. Her thoughts were already on the airport, the plane that would take her far from this life. She could almost see David waiting for her at the terminal, his car parked nearby. It wouldn't be long now. When she finished her statement, the officer nodded. We'll contact you if we need anything else. You're free to go for now. Without waiting for any further questions, Sarah turned and walked toward the door, her legs shaky but determined. She had to get out. Now, as she stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air hit her like a wave. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew she had to act quickly. She had to be gone before Jack returned and the reality of her betrayal set in. Her car, parked in the driveway, was still there. She could hear the hum of the engine as she slid into the driver's seat and started it. The headlights cut through the darkness as she drove away, her heart hammering in her chest. She was free. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was leaving everything behind. Sarah didn't look back as she sped through the streets, her mind focused on the task ahead. She drove through familiar neighborhoods, passing streets she had once walked with Jack, now feeling like foreign territory. The weight of her decision was heavy, but there was also a strange sense of liberation, a freedom she had never known before. She knew the airport wasn't far now. Soon, she would be on a plane, heading toward a new life with David, a life full of promise, full of possibility, a life where she could be herself, where she could love and live without the burden of her past weighing her down. She looked at the clock on the dashboard. It's time. With a deep breath, Sarah took the exit toward the airport. The lights of the terminal loomed ahead, and her heart fluttered in her chest. This was it, the beginning of something new. And as she pulled into the parking lot, David's car was already waiting. The airport loomed ahead, its bright lights flickering in the dark night. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of how much she had left behind. The car hummed beneath her, carrying her toward an uncertain future. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white, and the nerves she had suppressed throughout the entire ordeal began to bubble up once again. But this time, it wasn't fear of being caught. It was fear of the unknown. As she pulled into the parking garage, the familiar sound of her tires crunching over the gravel echoed in her ears. The airport had always been a place of departures and arrivals, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, she was the one leaving everything behind. Her eyes scanned the rows of cars as she drove slowly through the lot. The glow from the airport terminal beckoned her, and she saw the glow of David's headlights near the far end of the parking structure. There he was, waiting for her. The relief she felt seeing him almost made her forget the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Guilt, excitement, and the nagging thought that she had just destroyed her old life in a single act of betrayal. Sarah parked the car, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The cool night air hit her face, and for the first time in days, she felt truly alive, free. She closed the door behind her and walked toward David's car, her footsteps purposeful yet unsteady. David was leaning against his car, looking as composed as ever, but his eyes gave him away. They were wide with anticipation, just as nervous as she felt. His expression softened when he saw her, and he pushed himself off the vehicle to greet her. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and filled with urgency. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. "We did it. You're here." She nodded, offering him a shaky smile, her mind swirling. I still can't believe I'm doing this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But it's too late to turn back now, right?" David's gaze softened, and he gently cupped her face in his hands. "No turning back, Sarah. This is the life we've talked about. It's finally happening. We'll be together, and it's going to be amazing." But just as Sarah was about to say something in response, her phone buzzed. She hesitated for a moment, instinctively pulling it from her pocket. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. "Jack." She stared at the phone, the message clearly visible. "I know what you did. I'm on my way to the airport." Sarah's blood ran cold. How could he know? How had he found out? Was it the police? Did something go wrong? She could feel panic rising in her chest, her fingers trembling as she gripped the phone tighter. "What's wrong?" David asked, sensing her sudden shift in mood. "It's Jack," Sarah muttered, her voice shaking. "He knows. He's on his way here." David's face hardened. "You're sure? How do you know?" I just got a message." He knows, David. He knows I'm leaving." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the situation hit them both in full force. Sarah was certain now. Jack wasn't just going to let her walk away. He wasn't the type. There had to be more to the message than just a chance discovery. Had he been suspicious all along? Or was this his final attempt to drag her back? "We don't have much time," David said, snapping Sarah back to the present. "What's the plan?" Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed again. It was another message from Jack. "I'm already here. Don't even try to run." "David, I don't know what to do," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She had hoped for an easy escape. But now, the nightmare of her actions was crashing down on her in full force. She felt trapped between the man she had betrayed and the man she had run to. "You've come this far," David said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You can't turn back now. If Jack's here, then we need to act fast. We'll go through the back entrance. I'll drive, and you just follow my lead. I've got everything planned out." Sarah nodded, trying to steady her breath. "Okay, let's do it." As they rushed toward the back of the terminal, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was it. The moment everything would fall apart. Her eyes scanned the crowds of people in the parking lot, but she didn't see Jack. Her pulse quickened. He had to be close. David led the way, his movements purposeful and confident. He was used to living on the edge, but Sarah wasn't. She wasn't used to running, to breaking the rules, and certainly not to lying and betraying her husband. Every step felt like a crime she couldn't undo. They made it to the back of the terminal. The lights flickered as they passed by, and the sound of footsteps echoed on the cold concrete. Sarah's mind raced as they approached the car. The tension was unbearable, and she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder every few seconds, expecting to see Jack, expecting him to appear out of nowhere, blocking their path. That's when she heard it. "Sarah." It was Jack's voice. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she froze. She turned slowly, and there he was, standing at the entrance of the terminal, his expression twisted with disbelief and anger. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of hurt and fury. "Jack," she whispered, her voice faltering. She felt as though the air had been knocked out of her lungs. This was it. "You think you can just leave me like this? After everything?" Jack's voice was low, a mix of disbelief and rage. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched by his sides. You think I don't know? You think I wouldn't find out? Sarah stood there, her legs shaking. The reality of the situation crashed into her. She had betrayed him, yes, but this was something she had never anticipated. She had imagined Jack upset, confused, maybe even angry. But this fury, this desperation, she hadn't seen it coming. I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She wanted to say more, but the words felt hollow, useless. But I couldn't stay anymore. I couldn't live this life. I needed to be free. You're running away with him? Jack's eyes flickered toward David, who stood beside her, calm and composed, but Sarah could see the faintest twitch in his jaw. He was just as tense. After all we've been through? You've been lying to me for months. I gave you everything, Sarah, and this is how you repay me. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she forced them back. She didn't have time to feel guilty. Not now. I didn't want to hurt you, she repeated, her voice cracking. I thought I could leave quietly, that you wouldn't know. But I can't keep living a lie, Jack. Jack's face hardened. You think you can just walk away from me? From us? From everything? Before Sarah could respond, Jack took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His eyes were burning with pain, and for a moment, Sarah felt the weight of the years they had spent together. The love, the promises, the moments that had once felt so real. But then he said something that made her heart stop. You think I'm just going to let you leave? His voice was cold now, all emotion stripped away. I won't let you do this. I won't let you destroy everything. David moved in front of Sarah, standing between her and Jack, his eyes cold and steady. Jack, back off. She's made her choice. But Jack wasn't backing down. He looked over David. His eyes narrowed. You think I'm going to let you just take her? She's my wife. You don't get to just waltz in and steal her away from me. Enough, Jack. Sarah's voice cut through the tension, surprising both of them. She took a step forward, her gaze locking with Jack's. I'm done. I'm leaving. And no matter how angry you are, you can't stop me anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack stood there, staring at Sarah, his face a mixture of disbelief and brokenness. I love you, Jack, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. But I'm not the same person anymore, and I have to go. With that, she turned, stepping around David and walking toward the entrance of the terminal. This was it. Her past was behind her. She was leaving it all behind. David followed closely behind her, but Sarah didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew that leaving was the right choice, even if it felt like breaking apart her soul in the process. The airport terminal was a world apart from the chaos that had just unfolded outside. Sarah's heart still pounded in her chest, but now the tension in her muscles began to ease. She stood by the security check, her bag slung over her shoulder, glancing at David, who was busy checking their flight details on his phone. The storm outside had passed, but a different kind of weight began to settle in her chest. She had done it. She had left Jack, left the life they had built together. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. They walked together to the check-in counter, the clicking of their shoes on the tile floor echoing in the otherwise quiet space. No one was paying them much attention, but Sarah could feel eyes on them. Eyes that didn't understand, eyes that couldn't possibly comprehend what she had just done. There was no applause for the woman who was walking away from her marriage, no sympathy for the choices she had made. As they stood in line, Sarah couldn't help but think of the way Jack had looked at her in the parking lot, angry, betrayed, and heartbroken. She had expected pain, but the depth of it in his eyes had caught her off guard. He had loved her. He still loved her. And she had ripped that love apart with a single decision. David was the first to break the silence, his voice soft but confident. We're doing the right thing, Sarah. This is the life we talked about. No more lies. No more running. Sarah nodded, but the words didn't feel as comforting as they should. I just don't know anymore, David. I don't know if I made the right choice. What if... He cut her off, his eyes meeting hers with steady gaze. You made the right choice. Don't second-guess yourself now. We're starting fresh. together. But as the words left his mouth, Sarah couldn't push away the nagging thought that maybe she hadn't just left Jack. Maybe she had left herself behind, too. The next few hours were a blur. They made it through security and boarded their flight without incident, the hum of the airplane engines providing a strange sort of comfort. The flight was smooth, and before she knew it, they had landed in a new city, an unfamiliar place where no one knew their names. They were free, or so they thought. Sarah checked her phone as they disembarked, the screen flashing with multiple notifications. She hadn't looked at her messages since the confrontation with Jack, but now her fingers trembled as she opened the first one. It was from Jack. "You think this is over? You think you can just leave me and everything will be fine? You've made a mistake. Sarah." A big one. Her stomach tightened. Jack had always been volatile, but these words were different. This wasn't just anger, it was a threat. Sarah swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure, but the fear crept in, clouding her thoughts. David noticed her expression and leaned over her shoulder, reading the message. His eyes narrowed. "He's not going to let this go, Sarah. You know that, right?" "I know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't think it would happen like this." David reached for her hand, his grip firm. "Don't let it get to you. We're in control now. We have each other. That's all that matters." But Sarah wasn't convinced. This wasn't just about them anymore. As they left the terminal and made their way to a taxi, Sarah's mind raced. What would Jack do? What was he capable of? She had made the choice to leave him, but she had no idea how far he was willing to go to bring her back. The next few days were a strange mixture of freedom and anxiety. They checked into a hotel, and though the city around them was bustling and vibrant, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease that followed her everywhere she went. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched, expecting a new message from Jack, another angry rant, or worse, a warning. But there was nothing. The silence was deafening. David kept trying to reassure her. "He's probably just as confused as you are. He doesn't know what to do. He's angry, but he's not going to come after us. Not unless we give him a reason." But Sarah didn't feel reassured. Every time she went to sleep, she imagined Jack showing up at the hotel, bursting through the door, demanding answers. She imagined him yelling, crying, begging her to come back. It wasn't just the fear of what Jack might do that haunted her. It was a constant question that lingered in her mind. Had she made the right choice? She had betrayed him. She had walked away from everything she had known, from the life she had built with him. And now, she was faced with the silence of her decision, the absence of the life she had once lived. David did his best to keep things light, taking her out to explore the new city, but it felt hollow. Sarah smiled through the motions, but in her mind, she was thousands of miles away, thinking about Jack, the man she had loved, the man she had hurt, the man she had abandoned. 5 days passed. The city was a blur, and Sarah found herself trapped in a cycle of anxiety and guilt, unable to shake the feeling that everything she had done was wrong. But then a new message appeared on her phone, a voicemail from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat, and her hands shook as she pressed play. It was Jack's voice. "Sarah, I don't know what to say. You left without any explanation. I can't stop thinking about you, about what we had. I just want you to know, I'm sorry. I should have listened more. I should have been better. But I love you, and I'll always love you." The voicemail ended abruptly, and Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Was it too late? She listened to his words over and over, each time the pain cutting deeper into her soul. David, who had been standing nearby, watched her with concern. "You need to let him go. Sarah, you made the choice. He's not going to change, and neither are you." But Sarah couldn't stop herself. Her emotions swirled, torn between the man who had loved her and the man who was promising her a new life. That night, she stayed awake long after David fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her choices settling heavily on her chest. Was she running toward freedom, or was she running away from the person she had been? Days turned into weeks, and the unease in Sarah's heart never fully faded. She began to understand the cost of her choices. David was by her side, but the absence of Jack's presence, the absence of her old life, left a void that she didn't know how to fill. And then the call came. It was from Jack, but this time it wasn't a voicemail. It was live. Sarah, his voice cracked, raw with emotion. I've been thinking, I don't know how to move on from this. I don't know how to let you go. But I can't keep doing this, waiting for you to come back. I'm letting you go, Sarah. I'm not going to chase you anymore. But please don't forget me. Her heart broke all over again. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond. Goodbye, Sarah. And with that, the call ended. In that moment, Sarah realized something that hit her harder than anything before. This wasn't just the end of marriage. It was the end of a chapter. And with it, she had left behind everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and herself. The aftermath of her actions wasn't just about Jack or David. It was about her own sense of self. She had chosen freedom, but at what cost? As Sarah stared out at the city skyline, a sense of clarity began to settle in. The aftermath of her escape wasn't just about the life she had left behind. It was about the woman she was becoming. She had made the choice to leave, and she would have to live with it. The road ahead wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: there was no going back. The journey Sarah had embarked upon wasn't just about escaping a marriage, nor was it simply about running toward a new relationship with David. It was about something much deeper, something she hadn't fully understood until the dust began to settle. Her decision to leave Jack, to break free from the life they had built, was driven by a search for something she couldn't name. It was a need for freedom, for self-discovery, and in many ways, for redemption. But as she came to realize in the weeks that followed, the cost of that freedom was far higher than she had anticipated. The aftermath of Sarah's escape was far from simple. The emotional weight of betrayal and guilt lingered long after the confrontation at the airport. She had hurt someone who had loved her deeply. And though she had tried to justify her actions, the pain of what she had done could not be ignored. Jack's voice in the voicemail, raw with emotion, reminded her that love wasn't something you could just walk away from without leaving scars. His pain became her own, and the guilt of breaking his heart became a shadow that she couldn't outrun. Yet at the same time, Sarah couldn't deny the truth that had been buried beneath her fear and hesitation for so long. She needed to leave. Her marriage had been a prison of emotional neglect, unspoken resentments, and unfulfilled desires. In some ways, it wasn't even Jack that she had been escaping. It was a life she had built around him, a life that had stifled her spirit, her voice, and her dreams. David, while not without his own flaws, had offered her a chance at a new beginning. His presence in her life was a reminder that love wasn't something to escape from. It was something to evolve with. Yet, even as she embraced this new chapter, Sarah understood that her escape wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't about running toward a perfect new world. It was about navigating the complexities of her choices, the fallout of her actions, and the person she was becoming in the process. The decision to leave Jack didn't grant Sarah immediate peace. It didn't fix everything. What it did, however, was open a door to a new path, one filled with uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. She didn't know what the future held with David, or she would ever find a way to reconcile her past with Jack, but she did know one thing for certain. She was finally free to live on her own terms. And perhaps, in the end, that was the most important thing. Sarah wasn't running away from her past anymore. She was running toward herself, toward a future that, for the first time in years, was truly hers to shape. As she sat quietly, watching the world move on around her, she realized that freedom wasn't the absence of consequences. It was a courage to face them head-on. And in that moment, Sarah knew that no matter where the road took her next, she would be the one holding the map.